think that takes us back to the issue of the independent councillors. From what I understand, there have been some communications between the independent councillors, but while there may be agreement on some positions, there aren't on others. And in particular, there isn't agreement in relation to the position on the executive. So I think in those circumstances, in accordance with the decision made by Council last week, it would be appropriate to seek the nominations from the independent members and for the Council to determine that particular position. I think it's reasonable to say that the outcome of that may impact on any agreements which have made in relation to other positions, so it might be appropriate, Provost, if requested, that there be a recess to allow the independent members to then consider their position after any such vote, if there are two nominees for the independent place on the executive. So, Provost, I think it would be appropriate to ask for nominees for the independent place on the executive.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moody. Councillor Spears, do you have any nominations for Councillor Buchanan or Councillor Ritchie?
I would like to nominate Councillor Spears.
Any further nominations? Councillor Buchanan?
Councillor Buchanan.
And that being so, Provost, we have two nominees for the position on executive, Councillor Spears and Councillor Buchanan. Provost Bissett.
Councillor Buchanan.
Deputy Provost Balfour.
Abstain.
Councillor Anslow.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Binney. Councillor Bowes. Councillor Buchanan. Councillor Bundy.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Colley.
Abstain.
Councillor Deacon.
Abstain.
Councillor Devine.
Abstain.
Councillor Flynn.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Forrest.
Abstain.
Councillor Garner.
Abstain.
Councillor Hannah.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Kelly.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Kerr.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor McCabe.
Councillor Spears.
Councillor Meiklejohn.
Abstain.
Councillor Murtagh.
Abstain.
Councillor Nimmo.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Patterson.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Patrick.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Redmond.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Ritchie.
Councillor Buchanan.
Councillor Robertson.
Abstain.
Councillor Sinclair.
Abstain.
Councillor Spears.
Councillor Spears.
And Councillor Steinbank.
Councillor Buchanan.
Provost, there are 2 votes for Councillor Spears, there are 14 votes for Councillor Buchanan, and there were 12 abstentions. And Councillor Buchanan is duly appointed as the independent member on the executive. And Provost, I think it would be appropriate to check to see if any of the independent members wish a recess at this point, maybe to consider the outcome.
Would you like a recess, Councillor Spears?
Yes, please.
Councillor McCabe? Thank you. 10 minutes. Thank you. Councillor Spears, Councillor McCabe, have you anything you'd like to comment on or say after your short recess?
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. And I think that recess was just to allow the independent members to react to the vote, which was taken on the appointment from the executive. As I understand it, there is only limited agreement in relation to the remaining appointments, but there is some which I think I'm able to intimate to the council, and any of the independent members can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. So Councillor McCabe, as we will recall, was appointed as the convener of the Scrutiny Committee at last week's meeting, so he will be the independent member on the Scrutiny Committee. I understand Councillor Ritchie will be the independent member on external scrutiny. As we'll recall, the convenership of the Planning Committee is held by Councillor Buchanan, as appointed by the Council last week, so he is the independent member on the Planning Committee. Councillor Buchanan will take the independent place on the Licensing Board, and Councillor Ritchie will take the independent place on the Civic Licensing Committee. There aren't nominations or agreement in respect of the other positions as yet, and I suggest, Provost, that those are simply noted at the moment to allow for further discussion, and the matter can be reconsidered again at the June meeting of Council if necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Everybody happy with that? Please, thank you.
Provost, I think that concludes the appointments on item 6, and we move to item 7 on the agenda, which is the issue of remuneration of members. And the scope of the remuneration available to the Council is set out within the report. And this is set out within a set of statutory regulations made under the Local Governance Scotland Act of 2004. Broadly, there are 4 categories of members, and there are only decisions made to be made in relation to 2 of those. So the annual salary for councillors not holding a further position is fixed in statute, as is the salary of the leader of the council. The decisions to be made are in relation to the role of Provost as civic head and the role of senior councillors. The statutory scheme places certain limitations on the numbers and the level of payments that can be made to senior councillors. Only 14 senior councillor positions can be remunerated, and the total cost of the remuneration of those 14 can't exceed the figure which is set out at paragraph 5.3, which again is generated within the statutory regulations. At paragraph 5.4, the report provides information on the remuneration which was provided within the previous council. For information, the council isn't bound to follow what happened before, but it's there as information as to the previous scheme adopted by the council. There's also information provided, Provost, on the appointment made by the Central Scotland Valuation Joint Board, where the convenership and the vice convenership of the board is also remunerated, but that's separate from the council scheme. And the decision on the appointment of the vice convenership of that board is made by the board rather than the council. So the decisions that are being asked for the council today are to determine the level of remuneration to be paid to the Provost and to determine the number of senior councillor positions, identify those positions, and then the level of remuneration attached to them. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Councillor Meikle-John, do you have a motion?
Yes, Provost, I do have a motion, and I think the officers have something that can be circulated, but I'll just speak to the motion and the proposals. We have statutory policy guidance already to us in relation to council remuneration, and let's face it, that none of us came into this job for the money. It's more about what we can do for our communities, while the levels of remuneration are something that are ongoing discussions, particularly at COSLA, it's not a first premise, and I don't think it would be anybody's first premise when you stood for the election, is around that, and that is a credit to everybody in this room. The proposal would be that we would continue to the level of remuneration paid to the provost as it has been in the previous council, recognising as a civic head and the workload that a provost would be required to take on. Similarly, when we move into the senior councillors' positions, recognising that the balance of the council as well and the responsibilities have looked to spread the remunerations across the council in that respect. That's not always been something that's happened in the council in the past, but in a gesture of making that more inclusive across the council, I chose to reduce the number of portfolio holders and restructure the portfolios around the council structure, and that's been reflected in going down from 8 portfolios to 6. Therefore, leaving the ability to remunerate some of the other posts which have significant levels of work. So we have a scheme whereby it's three different levels that would be brought in, with the portfolio holders having the highest level at 26,235, a level 2 covering the conveners of planning, civic and licensing board, and leader of the main opposition being the Labour group. Level 3 would be deputy provost, convener of pensions and leader of the Conservative group. Recognising the changes in standing orders in relation to the non-aligned group, no longer having that statutory opposition position, there wouldn't be a remuneration here. That would then cover the 14 posts provost, and it would be great to be able to give something to everybody, but it's a recognition of the workload, the responsibility and the leadership in these particular roles going forward, and that would be my proposal. Thank you.
Do you have a seconder?
Happy to second reserving the right.
Thank you. Or would you like a recess just to consider Councillor Michael John's proposal? What about maybe 10-15 minutes? Thank you. Have you had time to consider Councillor Meiklejohn's motion, Councillor Hannah, and have you got any comment on it?
Yes, we have had some time. There are certain reservations about the motion because, as Bellasside is quite clear, we are keen that the champion positions are properly recognised because there is a very real enthusiasm in terms of collaborative working, in terms of putting forward a stronger role for those champions. However, given the funds available for the positions available, at the moment we would not want to oppose this, but we would hope to come back later in the year once all the positions are allocated and once we have seen the activities and the importance of the champions' roles, that we might be able to look at it again at a later stage.
Thank you very much. You want to follow up, Councillor Newton?
Thank you for Councillor Hannah's consideration of that, and I fully understand exactly what she's saying in regard to the champions, and we'd be happy to look at that in the future as the role it becomes more established and evolves.
Thank you, Councillor Meiklejohn. Councillor Kerr?
I was just to say, Provost, some of my members that's in the virtual rooms are struggling to hear people when they're talking because the microphones is not close enough. Just to make, I don't know if the other members on the virtual meeting are having the same difficulty, but just to bring the microphone forward and try so they can hear you. Thanks, Provost.
Councillor Kerr. I hope everyone noted that. And coming back to yourself, Councillor Kerr, do you have any further amendment?
No further amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Spears, do you have any further amendment? Councillor McCabe?
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, we wish to...
You put your mic on, please.
Microphone. Red lights are here. Is it working?
Okay.
Okay. We wish to put forward an amendment that Council recognise the importance of all committee conveners and remunerate them accordingly. If you have a look at level 2, conveners of planning, civic and licensing boards, and the leader of the Labour group, it's indicated the remuneration is there. The only one that's missing from that is the convener of scrutiny. And I think scrutiny is quite an important role. I think if you're going to recognise any convener by increasing the remuneration, you've got to include them all. The only one that's missing is the non-aligned independent group's representative. So the amendment would be that Council recognise the importance of all committee conveners and remunerate all equally.
Do you have a second of Councillor McCabe?
I'll second that. Yes, thank you, Provost. And returning, I think, to the issue that there are only 14 places that can be remunerated as senior councillors. And the substance of Councillor McCabe's amendment is that all conveners are remunerated. There are, in fact, I think, 4 unremunerated convener positions. So the convener of audit is not remunerated, the convener of scrutiny, the convener of scrutiny external, and the convener of appeals. So not open to the council to add 4 more positions to be remunerated within this scheme without being clear on which of the stood in the motion is currently put forward are to be deleted. Councillor McCabe perhaps needs a few minutes maybe just to consider the implications of that, and I'm obviously happy to offer some advice if that would assist.
if you don't mind, Provost, I'd like to take Mr Moody up in his offer there.
No problem,
Short
Councillor.
recess, yeah. Again.
Short recess,
Thank
5-10 minutes.
Smashing.
At the names, and there is a couple, I think, I could be wrong, that's doubled up, so would that help?
Which
Go on,
ones are
Provost.
doubled up?
Well, Deputy Provost is also civic, if I'm not right. Is that not right?
But I think Councillor Steinbank, he's
Oh,
chair, convener of civic.
Right. So is there any that is going to be doubling up? It could help this
I mean,
situation.
as Provost standard, no doublings up at the one position which to be appointed to, which is the convener of the licensing board,
Right.
which
Okay.
Thank you. Short recess, 5-10 minutes. Okay, have you any additional comment to make for their discussion?
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, and thanks to Mr. Moody for his guidance. I'd just like to amend the wording of our amendment to read that Council recognise the importance of the Scrutiny Committee convener's position and remunerate at level 2, equivalent to the planning, civic and licensing conveners.
Do you have a seconder for your adjustment?
I would like to second the motion and speak if that's okay.
Right, carry on.
Scrutiny is a large part of any democratic organisation. I know we like to regard ourselves as a democratic organisation here on Falkirk Council. So I think that the chairman of the Scrutiny Committee, this vitally important post, is recognised, and the amount of work that will go into chairing this particularly important committee be recognised.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Spears. We'll now go to the vote. Mr. Moody. Does anyone have any additional contributions you would like to make before we go to the vote? Councillor Mickelson.
I was just going to ask how in the inclusion at level 2 of the scrutiny functions within the convenership, how would that be balanced off when we only have the ability for 14 and that obviously an envelope, financial envelope that has to be within?
Thank you, Provost. There were senior councillor positions in the motion as proposed. So there is one spare position there which has been proposed by Councillor McCabe to be the convener of the Scrutiny Committee. The level proposed by Councillor McCabe just makes it within the financial envelope.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mickelson and Mr. Moody. Councillor Nimmo.
Convener, actually the question I was going to ask as well was to clarify whether this was an additional post and whether we still had funding to cover it.
Thanks, Councillor Nimmo. Councillor Kerr.
Mr. Moody, regarding the difference between the difference between responsibilities between scrutiny and external scrutiny.
Thank you. The question from Mr. Kerr is in relation to the responsibilities between the conveners of the Scrutiny Committee and the conveners of Scrutiny External. I think in my assessment they're broadly similar. The remits of the committees are designed to mirror the work in the creation of scrutiny. But the Scrutiny Committee External has a different remit in terms of the way it looks at relationships with bodies outside the Council, and the Scrutiny Committee itself looks internally at the workings of the Council services. But in my assessment, they are broadly similar.
Mr. Moody, can I just clarify what Mr. McCabe's amendment is? It's only for one position to be the convener of external scrutiny remunerated, as opposed to all the scrutiny functions.
Yes, that is correct. Included from it would be the convener of the Audit Committee. I had mentioned of the Appeals Committee earlier on, listing a further committee that would have a convenership unremunerated. I should correct that by saying it's held by Holders Council House, so come into the reckoning, but there would be two convenerships which would remain unremunerated.
Okay, any other further comments? Okay, we'll go to the vote, Mr. Moody.
Provost. The motion consists of the motion moved by Councillor Nico John, seconded by Councillor Garner, which has been circulated and which sets out the proposals in relation to remuneration for the council, against which there is an amendment which has been moved by and seconded by Councillor Spears. That essentially is to insert within the proposals in the motion an additional remunerating two, which is the convener of the committee of that role.
Do you want to come in before we go to the vote, Councillor Kerr?
Colin, could I-
Yeah.
Sorry, Provost, could I just ask that Mr Moody repeat that? I didn't quite catch, and it's really quite critical, sorry.
Change the microphone, I think.
Provost, I'll just wait till Mr Moody clarifies, same as Ms McKee.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Provost. I'll try again with this microphone. I think this one is clearer. So we have the motion, as I said, moved by Councillor Nico John, seconded by Councillor Garner. That's the motion in writing which has been circulated, which sets out a remuneration scheme for the senior councillor positions as a whole. Against which there is an amendment moved by Councillor McCabe and seconded by Councillor Spears. The effect of that amendment is to insert a further position at level 2 of the motion as circulated, and that position is the convener of the scrutiny committee. So I wonder if that is clear for members.
Just one scrutiny.
Yes. So I think to clarify, I think the point that Councillor Kerr was asking, which was that there were two scrutiny committees, the scrutiny committee and scrutiny external. It does not include scrutiny external, it's the scrutiny committee alone.
Okay, I think we'll now go to the vote.
Provost Bissett.
The motion.
Deputy Provost Ball.
The motion.
Councillor Anslow.
The motion.
Councillor Binney. Councillor Bowes.
Motion.
Councillor Buchanan. Councillor Bundy.
Motion.
Councillor Colley.
Motion.
Councillor Deacon.
Motion.
Councillor Devine.
Motion.
Councillor Flynn.
Motion.
Councillor Forrest. Councillor Garner.
Motion.
Councillor Hannah.
The motion.
Councillor Kelly.
Motion.
Councillor Kerr.
The motion.
Amendment.
Councillor Miko John.
Motion.
Councillor Marta.
Motion.
Councillor Nimmo.
Motion, sorry, Colin. Never heard my name getting shouted.
Councillor Patterson.
Motion.
Councillor Patrick.
Motion.
Councillor Redmond.
Motion.
Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Robertson.
Motion. Motion.
Councillor Spear.
Amendment.
And Councillor Steinbank.
Motion.
Provost, there are 26 votes for the motion, 2 votes for the amendment, and the motion is accordingly carried.
Thank you, Mr Moody. Next item is agenda item 8, appointment to external organisations.
Provost, sorry, I wonder if I could maybe just interject for a second. Just on a general point regarding the microphones, can we try and get something done before the next full council meeting? Because these microphones obviously aren't fit for purpose.
Thanks, Councillor Nimmo. Good point, noted.
And Provost, if I could maybe say, we have had some problems with the microphones during the course of this meeting and the last one. In general, the microphones have worked well over the past meetings of council that have been taking place this year. We are in touch with the manufacturers to get some support in relation to see if we can improve their operation in advance of the next meetings. So we have that in hand. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Moody. The next item of business is appointment to external organisations. This is a report by Director of Transformation, Communities and Corporate Services, pages 108 to 116 on your agendas. Mr Moody, summarise the report, please.
Yes, thank you, Provost. And members will recall, I think, that this is one item where we made one decision in relation to these appointments in the meeting last week, which was in relation to the delegates to the COSLA Convention. But all of the remaining items remain to be appointed. So on the issue of COSLA, to begin with, the first series of appointments are to the Council's representatives to the COSLA boards. Those are set out at paragraph 4.1 within the report. They are important, I think, strategic bodies, ways of developing and sharing policy development within these particular areas. So I think that's important to have in mind when the Council comes to make its appointments to the COSLA boards. And it's probably better, Provost, to pause at that point and ask for nominations in relation to the boards and do that before we move on to the remaining bodies set out from paragraph 4.5 onwards.
Thanks, Mr Moody. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Provost. The COSLA thematic boards are decision-making bodies, and I think it's important that Falkirk Council is represented there and represented with their policy leads within those particular areas. We have in the past not, as an administration, had those policy leads, and that has been hugely detrimental to Falkirk Council's position and being able to feed into those particular boards. So I therefore would propose to move that the portfolio holders for each of the areas be the nominations for the boards. Therefore, I would move Councillor Laura Murtagh for the Children and Young People's Board, Fiona Colley for the Health and Social Care Board, Councillor Garner for the Environment and Economy Board, and Councillor Devine for the Community and Wellbeing.
Thank you, Councillor Meikle-John. Do you have any other nominations? No.
Yes, thank you, Provost. And that being so, the appointments made by the Council are for the Children and Young People Board, Councillor Murtagh, for the Health and Social Care Board, Councillor Colley, for the Environment and Economy Board, Councillor Garner, and for the Community Wellbeing Board, Councillor Devine. Provost, that takes us on to paragraph 4.5 and the Scottish Enterprise Advisory Board, as indicated in the report. So again,
Councillor Meikle-John, nominations.
Could I nominate the Economic Development portfolio holder, Councillor Gardner? I wish it was.
Any further nominations? No. Mr Moody.
Thank you, Provost. Advisory Board. We move to the Falkirk District Twinning Association, information on the bodies. The Provost is the group's honorary president, and there are 3 further places for councillors which the Council is able to appoint to.
Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Provost. This is one of the more civic organisations that the Council is part of, and obviously yourself as Provost, as ex officio, you're already nominated to that. Having international links with particularly with some of our twinned areas, particularly in France, I'm going to nominate Councillor Laura Murtagh.
Thank you, Councillor Meikle-John. Any further nominations? No. Councillor Kerr.
How many positions is there? Councillor Bundy, Provost.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. Any further nominations?
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. Mr Moody?
Yes, thank you, Provost. The council, Councillor Murtagh, Councillor
Thank you.
to the Sturringshire Education Trust. The Educational Trust is a grant-making body for qualifying students who live within the county of Stirlingshire. It's originally the nominating council for the trust would have been Stirling County Council, but Falkirk Council has inherited many of the nominating rights of the Stirlingshire County Council in recognition of the fact that much of the population of the former county council area lives within the Falkirk Council area. And in recognition of that, there are 7 places for members of the council on that body. And accordingly, Provost, again, I think it would be a question of seeking any nominations.
Thank you. Councillor Meiklejohn?
Thank you, Provost, and knowing personally some of those that have benefited from being able to access the support of Stirlingshire Educational Trust, I think it's hugely important for our young people to certainly be made aware of it. I'm therefore going to nominate Councillor Laura Murtagh as our education portfolio lead, but also in representing a broader, younger age range, Councillors Ian Sinclair and Brian Deacon. Sorry, Councillor Deacon.
Thanks very much, Councillor Meiklejohn. Councillor Hart?
Yes, I agree. I think it's important that there is a youth voice on it, and with that in mind, I would like to nominate Councillor Patterson and Councillor Steenbank.
Thanks, Councillor Hannah. Any further nominations? Councillor Kerr?
Councillor Jim Flynn.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. Any other nominations? Put your microphone on. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. There are 6 members who have been nominated and duly appointed. Councillors Murtagh, Sinclair, Deacon, Patterson, Steenbank and Flynn. Thank you, Provost. Provost, that I think takes us to the final appointment, which is at paragraph 411, which is the Scottish Schools Education Research Centre, and there is one appointment to be made by the Council onto the Board of Directors of that body. Thank you.
Councillor Meiklejohn?
I would like to nominate Councillor Laura Murtagh.
Councillor Hannah, any nominations?
Okay.
No nominations? Any other nominations? Mr Moody?
Provost, and Councillor Murtagh duly appointed. And Provost, that completes the nominations and appointment in relation to item 8.
Thank you, Mr Moody. The next item of business is agenda item 9, programme of meetings June to December 2022 and meeting arrangement. And the report is by Director of Transformation, Communities and Corporate Services, pages 117 to 120 in your agendas. Mr Moody will summarise the report. Mr Moody.
Thank you, Provost. And there are 2 items for decision in relation to this item. One is to agree the programme of meetings, which is set out as the appendix to the report, and that covers the period from June to December at the end of this year. And the other is just to give general consideration to the issue of how those meetings are run, and in particular whether the Council should continue the approach of hybrid meetings for the operation of each of the meetings, which is set out within the programme. So a decision is sought on both issues. In relation to the programme of meetings, I should advise that since the public of the report, it has been drawn to my attention and some representations made that there may be some difficulties in relation to the timing of the council meeting at the end of the month, which is on June the 29th. There has traditionally, I think, been a meeting of the council which has taken place towards the end of June. But because the date of the meeting falls in a week that also has a July, it unfortunately coincides with the council's school holiday period. And I think, Provost, there would be a way of resolving that particular issue, which would be to move the meeting on the 29th into the week before, so that the meeting took place on the Thursday of the week. It would mean a busy week of meetings for the week before, including the executives, the civic licensing committee, and then to follow on from that. I've also noted, Provost, that in looking into the programme of meetings, there is one further clash later on in the year, which is the planning committee for the October holiday, which I think again could be accommodated relatively easily by moving that back 1 week so that it takes place after the school holidays. And I think this is a recognition that there I think may now be more members of the council with school-aged children than in the last term, and I think it is just an appropriate step, I think, for the council to consider in the programming of its meetings, and one we can take into account in the future programmes as we go through the life of the council. So those are two adjustments which I would propose in relation to the programme as set out in the appendix, but otherwise I would ask you to agree the appendix as set out.
Mr. Meiklejohn, do you have a motion?
I don't have a motion, but I'm happy to move the recommendations with the alterations that Mr Moody has given, and just make a plea for speaking to our partners around the timing of meetings as well, so that we can ensure as little by way of clashes as possible with various meetings across the piece. And I appreciate that that's a difficult task for officers to do, to be juggling, because I know that fitting in with our colleagues, the Health Board, the IGIB, community planning and various others has its significant challenges. I would also move that we do continue to have the option of a hybrid meeting, because I think that gives people opportunities to participate, whereby they may have other caring roles or indeed have to juggle other employment, and being two places at one time very difficult. I've tried that and not managed to do that successfully as yet. So do appreciate that there's time constraints people have in relation to other responsibilities, and I think it is the way forward. We have successfully over the last 2 years managed to run virtual meetings, and we are gaining experience by every meeting that we do in a hybrid fashion, and how to actually facilitate those as best as possible. So I would make those two proposals for us.
Thanks very much, Councillor Meiklejohn. Councillor Kerr?
Thanks, Provost. Totally agree with really the council says. We have had 2 years of virtual meetings. That has been great, the last two meetings when we've been together. I think you get a lot more out of the meetings when you're face to face. But I would just like to ask Mr Moody if the time can be changed back to 9:30. We change it to 10 o'clock to accommodate because people have trouble virtually. But I think we've overcome that problem, and I would propose that we put it back to happening, the meetings.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. And that, just to say, I don't disagree with what's been said here. I think that the hybrid meetings have been very successful, and I think I'd like to recognise the effort that went into actually pulling these meetings together by Mr Moody and his team, and I think it's worked pretty well, apart from his problem with the microphones. Mr Moody?
Thank you, Provost. I take on board the point Councillor Kerr is making, and the Council did previously meet at 9:30. I think the issue with the hybrid meetings is that there is quite a considerable amount of setup and testing for the equipment, the microphones, the cameras in advance of the meeting starting at 10 o'clock. And certainly I think from the perspective of those involved in doing that work, the 10 o'clock start is appreciated just to allow more time to be available to do that. But we're in the hands of Council on its preference on that particular point between 9:30 and 10.
Councillor Colley?
I would appreciate putting in a viewpoint. I think that whilst now 9:30 can be, it's good to get them started early, and that's helpful. I think that we also need to remember about people having responsibilities with either children or parent roles, and sometimes the 10 o'clock has been an assistance to that. So I think it's trying to find a balance, and I understand that. But I think if we go back to a practice of everything being at 9:30, sometimes that can be more difficult. So I think it's just finding a way forward, which sometimes isn't really easy to meet everybody's needs. But I just wanted to note that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Colley. Do you want to take any comments, Councillor Kerr, on what Mr Moody said?
I understand what I was saying, but 9:30 suits me. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Murtagh?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a general agreement. I agree with what Councillor Colley is saying, and from an equality perspective, I think that it's not so much that we're not starting to 10 o'clock, because generally the practice I think of most groups will be that members will meet in their own groups prior in some time before meetings, and therefore, if you do have children to get to school, or arrange additional childcare, that can mean a difficulty. So it's important that we acknowledge that, particularly having a younger council. But I think also from an accessibility point of view, I very much enjoy being back in hybrid in a physical environment. But for those who have disabilities as well as or other access requirements, I think it's important to maintain that hybrid meeting. I did want to just draw the attention, though, which I was flagging about the point that was being made about the full council at the end of the month, and that there's also another meeting scheduled earlier in that week for the planning committee on the day before. And well, I'm not proposing a specific alternative to that. It would be helpful if also could note that and perhaps have some discussion around that, because I haven't seen the full slate of everybody on the planning committee either. But that might also be a particular issue. And I know that sometimes with planning, it can be, we don't want to go over non-determination deadlines and stuff. So perhaps there's some pragmatic discussion between officers and the convener could be looked at about potentially something around that meeting. It would be helpful to members if that would be noted.
Thanks, Councillor Murtagh. I think there's general consensus that we keep it at 10 o'clock.
No, it's just about the full council meeting being brought forward to I think it's 23rd, it was Thursday, wasn't it? I won't be able to attend that. I mean, I've got other commitments that day that I've had planned for about a year. So just to say that I won't be able to come.
Thanks, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Garner?
Thank you, Provost. I'm not sure there is consensus in this one, and I would be happy to back Councillor Kerr if he's putting this forward.
Thanks, Councillor Garner. Councillor Kerr, do you want to propose that as an amendment, 9:30?
I'll propose that as an amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Bundy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that I'll also be unavailable on the 23rd because of prior work commitments.
Okay, thank you. Mr Moody?
So I think, Provost, the only point that is dividing the members of the council is the question of whether the meetings start at 9:30 or whether the meetings start at 10 o'clock. So essentially we have a motion move to agree the programme of meetings as adjusted, and also that we agree that meetings are run as hybrid meetings for the remainder of the year. And the only amendment, I think, which is moved to that is that the programme of meetings is agreed but subject to them starting at 9:30, and the amendment is by Councillor Kerr and seconded by Councillor Garner. So essentially, Provost, the motion is 10 o'clock and the amendment is 9:30 to simplify matters.
Can I just ask if Councillor Hannah, you want your group want to maybe discuss that, or are you quite happy with going ahead with the vote?
I'm quite happy with my group's wanting to, and I absolutely agree with the concerns that people have expressed in terms of caring responsibilities. I think people who are dropping off their children at school don't want to be rushing for a meeting at 9:30 if they don't have to. Would be my. I mean, I do understand 9:30 suits me just as much as 10 o'clock. So it makes no odds to me. But I think for inclusivity of those who do have young children or caring responsibilities, I think it's important.
Thanks, Councillor Hannah. We'll go to the vote then.
Thank you, Provost. And just a reminder, the motion is the meetings at 10 o'clock. The amendment is the meetings at 9:30. Provost Bissett.
Motion.
Deputy Provost Balfour.
Motion.
Councillor Anslow.
Motion.
Councillor Binney. Councillor Bowes.
Motion.
Councillor Buchanan. Councillor Bundy.
Amendment.
Councillor Colley.
Motion.
Councillor Deacon.
Motion.
Councillor Devine.
Motion.
Councillor Flynn.
Amendment.
Councillor Forrest.
Motion.
Councillor Garner.
Motion. The amendment, sorry. I'm presuming I went for the wrong one there, Colin. The amendment then.
Councillor Hannah.
Motion.
Councillor Kelly.
Motion.
Councillor Kerr.
Amendment.
Councillor McCabe. Councillor Meiklejohn.
For the motion.
Councillor Murtagh.
The motion.
Councillor Nimmo.
Motion.
Councillor Patterson.
Motion.
Councillor Patrick. Councillor Patrick, I think you may be on mute. We'll come back to Councillor Patrick. Thank you, Councillor Patrick. Councillor Redmond. Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Robertson.
Motion.
Councillor Sinclair.
Motion.
Councillor Spears.
Motion.
And Councillor Steinbach.
Motion.
Provost, there are 20 votes for the motion. There are 7 votes for the amendment. There was 1 abstention. Councillors accordingly agreed the programme of meetings and that the time of starting will be 10 o'clock. And Provost, that concludes that item of business.
Thank you, Mr Moody, and that concludes part 2 of the council meeting, and business is finished. And thanks for your attendance. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.